Hey everybody, I know it's not Thursday. This is not a normal full-length Shameless Popery episode. Don't worry, those are staying exactly on schedule. But I wanted to share good news, which is we have a Patreon. So if you're someone who has benefited from this podcast and would like to contribute, by all means, please check out the link below. And there's going to be 4 tiers, and we're still figuring out all the details. But right now it looks like it's going to look like this. At the $5 a month level, as affordable as we can make it, a weekly live stream Q&A. So if you're someone who's got questions and would like to be able to ask them more directly than in the comments below, you can get on there and I'll try to answer questions for about an hour a week. At the level above that, $10 a month, we've got short form, like shorter than a normal Shameless Popery episode every month, maybe even a couple a month. And I'll give you an example today as to the kind of topics that are worth addressing that don't really take 30 to 60 minutes to address. Third, you got the $25 a month tier. It's going to have a mug and some cool discounts on stuff. And at the top tier, like $100 a month, I know that's going to be way out of reach for a lot of people, but for the kind of fat cat club, if you're someone who wants to donate at that level, there's going to be a private WhatsApp group for just like those top tier donors, so you can reach out pretty directly to me on my phone. So I alluded to the fact that there are these short videos I've been wanting to do that aren't really long enough to be a full episode, but are still things that are worth addressing. What kind of things might those be? For instance, the question, is baptism by immersion only? You will find Baptists who say it's not a real baptism unless you immerse the person. You can't just pour water upon them. In many churches, especially in Catholic churches today, if you go to get baptized, they will pour water over you. You're not going to like bodily go all the way into the baptismal font. You may not even have a baptismal font capable of doing that in your church. And so you'll find Baptists who say, hey, the Greek suggests that you're actually being immersed. And so anything besides that isn't a real baptism. There is an easy response to that. The Didache, which is from probably the 1st century, maybe the early 2nd century, one of the oldest, if not the oldest, Christian document outside of the New Testament itself, talks about what it was the apostles taught. So even the word Didache is like the teaching of the 12 apostles. And in it, in chapter 7, it talks about how baptism works. So it specifies that you baptize in the name of the Father and the Son and the Holy Spirit, and it says you do it in living water, which means moving water. So far, the immersion-only Baptists are going to say, exactly, you're baptizing in running water. But the Didache then goes on to say in the next sentence, if you don't have running water or living water, baptize into other water. If you don't have cold, then do it in warm. In other words, it leaves a lot of stuff up to the individual local practice. And it says if you have neither, so if you don't have a lot of water of either kind, pour out water thrice upon the head in the name of the Father and Son and Holy Spirit. So the important thing is that you're getting the Trinitarian formula right. What's not important is whether the water is warm or cold, or whether it's running or not, whether you're immersing the person or pouring it over their heads. We see this reflected again in the mid-200s in what's called Epistle 75 by St. Cyprian of Carthage. He's asked what he thinks of those who obtain God's grace in sickness and weakness, whether they're to be accounted as legitimate Christians because they didn't have full immersion. They just had the water sprinkled over them. Now, there's actually canonical questions I'm going to leave aside here because as Catholics, we believe you should either be immersed or have pouring. Sprinkling is more dubious because of reasons it doesn't really matter to get into here. But nevertheless, he's going to say even this cases of sprinkling is valid as a sacrament. And the reasons he gives are really important. He says he doesn't think it matters to do what you think is right, but as his poor understanding conceives it, he doesn't understand why that would mutilate or weaken the divine benefit in any way. He says, nor can anything less occur in that case, where with full and entire faith, both of the giver and receiver is accepted what is drawn from the divine gifts. Like, why would God withhold his grace to those who are asking for it faithfully? But he says, in the sacraments of salvation, and he doesn't say what he means by sacraments plural. He probably means the baptismal sacrament plus the post-baptismal sealing that we now call confirmation, But in the sacraments of salvation, he says, when necessity compels. So the ordinary practice in the early church, without question, was to be immersed in running water. Both sides agree on that question. Cyprian's point is that, well, if you need to not do that, like if you're a sick person who can't go get immersed and you need someone to come and pour the water, that's fine. Why? Because God bestows his mercy and the divine methods confer the whole benefit on believers. Nor, he says, ought it to trouble anyone that sick people seem to be sprinkled or effused, that there's, water being sprinkled or poured upon their heads when they obtain the Lord's grace. And he says, well, why would we think that? Well, he actually gives a few different Old Testament verses, but I want to cite one, which is Ezekiel 36, where he quotes, "Then will I sprinkle clean water upon you, and you shall be clean. From all your filthiness and from all your idols will I cleanse you. And I will give you a new heart, and a new spirit will I put within you." Now, this gets to the heart of why early Christianity looks very different from Baptist Protestantism. That Baptist Protestants are viewing this primarily as a symbol. It's an ordinance. It's something we are doing for God. And so getting it just right matters. And it becomes actually strangely legalistic and ritualistic. Whereas the early Christians realized, no, this is something God is doing for us. He's the one sprinkling clean water upon us. He's the one cleansing us. He's the one liberating us from our filthiness and from our idolatry. He's the one putting a new heart within us. And so we are responding to that. And so we're not getting hung up on the details of whether the water is warm or cold or whether it's moving or not, because those things at the symbolic level are all really secondary. And so Cyprian says, thus it appears that the sprinkling also of water prevails equally with the washing of salvation. And that when this is done in the church, where the faith both of receiver and giver is sound, all things hold and may be consummated and perfected by the majesty of the Lord and by the truth of faith. Now, in the century after Cyprian, we're going to see even more clarity on this question, that even if the person giving baptism is faithless, it's still God at work. When Judas went out and baptized people, we don't see them having to get rebaptized. When John the Baptist baptized people, even though John the Baptist was way holier than Judas, they did have to get rebaptized. We see that in the New Testament. Why? John's baptism wasn't Trinitarian. It wasn't the sacrament of baptism. It was just a symbol. But the apostles, including Judas, gave valid sacramental Trinitarian baptisms, and so they didn't have to be repeated. So that's what we see both in the New Testament, as you can see from contrasting Judas and John, and from the Didache, and from Cyprian, and from a bunch of other sources. All that's to say, the reason we don't get hung up on, exactly how old does a person have to be, any of those questions of all the kind of legalistic stuff, is because we realize at the heart of baptism, it's something God is doing for us, not something that we're doing for God. For Shameless Popery, I'm Joe Heschmeyer. I really look forward to hearing from all of you, and I'd love to see you in Patreon as well. God bless you.